All right, so I'm recording. If
now.
people, just so everybody knows, if people can give verbal consent or thumbs up or something like that,
Sorry, I
and
look
we will
hungry. I just got out of the
proceed.
shower.
That's assuming that you're going to participate. If you're not participating, I guess you don't need to give consent.
Mm.
But I hope everybody will participate.
I'm participating.
Yes, you are actively participating, and I deeply appreciate that. So Tina, Jackson, Arturo, you're all okay?
We're the Jackson 5, yes.
Yes.
We are 5 people right now. Maybe more people will join us because I did send out that email kind of late. All right, so let's get started. Oh wait, Laja, you wanted to talk about quizzes.
Oh,
Right?
yeah. I guess it's more of a question.
Yes.
I can just email you. It was more of like
Okay.
a personal thing. I just didn't understand a couple of the questions on one of the quizzes.
Yeah, that's gonna happen.
Okay.
I mean,
I did well on
it
one.
happens anyway, but it's
Well,
gonna be
yeah.
more
It was just
of
some
an
of the
issue.
wording. I was kind of confused.
Yeah. It's a tricky balancing act trying to tailor these quizzes to online presentations so that they're still effective in incentivizing people to do the readings, but not too overly difficult or obscure.
Yes. I'll just email you.
Okay. Any other
Art.
important notes? I sent out an email yesterday just notifying people about the I think it was yesterday, or yeah, that about giving an update on the video recordings that I'd posted and the presentations and the quizzes. But certainly if people have any questions or issues with any of that, they should get in touch with me by email.
Did you tell them about the one that we lost, that one recording? Just in case they, I guess, look for it.
No, I think I forgot
You
to
didn't?
mention that. I
Because
forgot. Yeah.
somebody asked me about it, and I
Yeah.
told them, was like, I think he lost that recording.
Yeah,
So
I
they're
screwed
like,
it
"Oh,
up.
okay."
I walked away from the computer for a moment, and then when I came back to it, I don't know what happened. But yeah, thanks for reminding me. I should make that clear that we don't have a recording for last Thursday's class session. And also about the quizzes, I've decided to give everybody one chance to retake a quiz.
I saw that, and that is amazing.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. So you have one chance to retake it, but only one. So you still have to,
That saved my life yesterday. So
yeah. Okay. Good.
Do I have to do my quiz?
You don't have to take your own quiz. The quiz that if you are presenting on a reading and you make the quiz, you don't have to take it.
I just want to make sure so I won't get like a nice 0 on that.
No, I don't. It's not automatic, but I will go through the grades at some point and make sure that everybody's the presenters' missing quiz grades are filled in for the quizzes that they made.
I just thought of something. I have a question.
Yeah.
You told us that our midterm was not happening. How is that percentage gonna affect our grade? Like, where is that getting distributed elsewhere?
Yeah. That is a very good question.
I don't like questions about midterms.
No. It's not that he's giving us a midterm. He canceled the midterm.
Yeah, it's a question of how the grading percentages are going to be reweighted.
Yeah, the weights.
Yeah, the weights. So I generally in this situation would just try to kind of spread it out so that the basic distribution or weighting remain the proportions of weight given to each assignment remain consistent across the board. The alternative would be just to increase the I mean, I don't want to put so much emphasis on the final exam by making that count for double what it would otherwise count for. So I'll probably just try to spread it around, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. That's
yeah.
good. That's
So it shouldn't really change the basic the relative emphasis on different types of assignments, quizzes, presentations, and so forth. But obviously, that means a little bit more weight will be given to everything else.
Oh, damn it.
It's not a bad thing, Tina. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine.
It'll be helpful in the long run.
Yeah.
If we've been doing good if we've been passing the class so far, when he
Exactly.
adds more weight, we're still gonna probably
yeah. If anything, it makes your
makes sense.
course grade maybe more predictable rather than less, because it's not going to come down to one test that you're taking on a bad day or something.
It won't. Yeah.
All right. So to recap or segue from our discussion on Tuesday, we were talking about Gursky's work and the influence, the various influences. Shoes. Yeah, we weren't really talking that much about shoes. We could talk about shoes. But we were talking about the influence of Gursky's teachers and mentors on his work, the Beschers. And I think, going through some of these images, just to refresh people's memories, although the subject matter is not at all the same, aside from, some certain images like this one or this one, which depict architecture. But even in those cases, the subject matter is pretty different from the preferred subject matter of the Beschers' work, which is these industrial structures. But there are certain points of connection that I think we were able to establish. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to arrange these so that I can see you guys, but this is weird. All right. I don't know where to put this. It's going to be in the way wherever I put it. That's okay. I kind of liked it. Yeah, whatever. Okay. So so what are some of those similarities? What do we see in Gursky's work that we could maybe relate to the influence of the Beschers on his artistic development? He studied under them. What kinds of characteristics could we apply to the Beschers' work, just in general?
It's all a repetition of of just buildings.
Yeah.
Kind of similar structure.
Exactly. Building types. Yeah. Right. So repetition of similar but not identical elements is one way to look at it. Also, the way in which these photographs by the Beschers are composed, they're so centrally kind of and frontally arranged, the shots of these different structures, and you see that in Gursky's work too. It's very rare that you have any oblique angles everything is straight on, wide angle, and shot, as kind of everything is subjected to this kind of leveling gaze. The lighting has to be kind of unified and consistent, because the interest of the photographer is not in capturing, say, the effects of light at a certain time of day or a certain season on the structures, whether we're talking about Gursky or the Beschers. It's really in the fine details, the minute details of the subject matter or the the object of attention here, but especially that seriality, that serial repetition of similar units. That's also something that that kind of links the Beschers' work with minimalism, minimalist sculpture. Even though they are working in a completely different medium, they share some of the same sculptural concerns in terms of their choice of subject matter. The particular kinds of structures that they choose to photograph are often they're interesting primarily because of their shape or their form, and that kind of relates it to sculpture, but also this interest in repetition of simple and similar forms is something you find in, say, the work of Donald Judd or Robert Morris or any number of other minimalists. And they're often presented in grids, the work of the Beschers, which is not true of Gursky's work, but not always. Sometimes, and they kind of mix up the style of presentation of their works. The same photograph might be shown in an arrangement like this, in a grid, presented together with photographs of similar objects. These are these half timber houses that are very characteristic of German villages and so forth, these Fachwerk houses. But sometimes they will isolate an image and show it, like this one, as an individual object. So we also talked about how the Beschers they were, a generation older than Gursky and his whole generation of photographers, people like Thomas Struth, who I mentioned briefly last time as well, or others. But the Beschers kind of bridged the gap between the work of the interwar German photographers, the New Objectivity or Neue Sachlichkeit photographers, and the contemporary art scene. So, although the Beschers' work can be compared to the work of the minimalist sculptors or to conceptual work of various conceptual artists, there's also connections that can be drawn with these New Objectivity, the photography of the New Objectivity movement or trend in Germany between the world wars. So repetition, obviously something that they have in common here. The emphasis on clarity of detail, and also maybe pattern, use of black and white, as well as these sort of more humanizing elements, or these elements of these aspects of the human subjects of the photographer that create a kind of variation. And so, you might have a photograph like this one on the left, 1929, Field Full of Children, which is shot from an angle that makes the individual identity of the different children unrecognizable. They sort of lose their individuality, but they are not posed identically. They are not arranged in any kind of strict order. And likewise, when you look at some of these groupings of images by the Beschers, you see the small differences between them create a same sense of variation or variability that kind of humanizes what would otherwise be a very inhuman or impersonal type of subject matter. So put these comparisons together, but probably the photographer from the interwar period who's exerted the most significant influence on contemporary photography, partly through the mediation of the Beschers' work and their teaching, and partly in its, independently, is the work of August Sander. So he was a German photographer who conceived of this incredibly ambitious project called Faces of the Time, Faces of Antlitz der Zeit. And his goal was to basically include examples of every conceivable kind of human type, every conceivable social type in German society in the years that he was working towards this goal. So different social classes and especially different professions you see represented in these works. This is a notary, for example, an image of country girls. I'm just giving you the titles. This is all the information we have about the people represented, except in this case where we actually know the identity of this individual, his name, but he is identified in the titling of the work simply by profession as a painter, as well as people kind of on the margins of society. So here you might be wondering what connection Sander's work could have, if anything, with the Beschers. If we were to put these side by side, say take this Sander photograph of a bricklayer from 1928 and compare it to this photograph of a coal bunker by Barrington Hille Bescher, just as an example, could we identify any points of connection here, or points of connection between these two artistic projects as a whole, kind of generally speaking? The differences are pretty obvious, right? Completely different subject matter. So if we're talking about similarities, we have to kind of look beyond what we see and think about similarities in the photographer's technique or approach or style.
They're both vertical in like the position of where the focal point is.
Yeah, and that focal point is very clear, right? Both of these compositions are rigorously and very strictly centered and kind of symmetrical. The format is the same, you're right, but more than that, they're shot in the same way, from the same frontal perspective. The entire, nothing is cropped of the photographic subject. It is presented clearly and completely, in outline here. Let's see. What about here? Or actually, I don't want to move on just yet. Are there, what if we were to try to identify similarities in, I won't say subject matter, but in the, similar qualities in the bricklayer on the left versus this coal bunker on the right? Visual qualities or just physical qualities, physical characteristics.
I think both images show like some sort of support system, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
The coal bunker is like, it's a large building. I don't know how many feet it would actually be from the photograph, but obviously it's quite large. And the way the coal bunker, I don't really know much about the coal mining and like the system, but it's holding all the coal, correct?
Yeah.
So that's a lot. Coal can get kind of heavy when it's all together, I'm assuming. And it's hot and lots of pressure and lots of dangerous activity. And the bricklayer, that's pretty dangerous to just be balancing like a stack of bricks like that close to your cranium. Like just one wrong move, your face could get smashed in. So like they're holding, it's like almost like the sander is trying to like imply that the reason that these industrial activities are afloat is because of the industrial workers that help it move forward. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm on a rant.
It's okay. It's okay. No. I think that I'm getting some feedback here on the audio, but all right, not anymore. Good. I think I'm on the same page with you here.
Are you following what I'm saying?
I think I am. Yeah. So you have in the Zonder image this human figure who is carrying all these bricks. This is obviously kind of the the emblem of his trade. He is a bricklayer. He is carrying the stack of bricks. And what the photographer really emphasizes is the bricklayer's strength and solidity, right? So it's the job of these bricks to hold up some kind of structure, some kind of building. It's the job of the bricklayer to hold up these bricks and to kind of move them around in the process of laying them and constructing the building. So characteristic of new objectivity photography is this blurring of the distinction between the human and the inhuman, or the animate and the inanimate. Human beings are often rendered sort of disturbingly abstract or represented in a way that kind of dehumanizes them, strips them of their individuality, their personality. And I'm going back to this one to point to the image on the left as an example of that, or this one by Hein Gorny, which depicts objects, not people, but it depicts an object, a shirt collar, that is associated with a certain kind of stereotypical person. The office drone, the anonymous, faceless, impersonal office worker or businessman. Conversely, when these new objectivity photographers depict objects, they often do so in a way that kind of humanizes them, that emphasizes their subtle differences and views them almost anthropomorphically, the way I said that these laboratory glasses photographed by Albert Renger-Pach are arranged in a way that gives the image some of the qualities of like a family portrait almost, with the parents in the background and the children of varying ages in front. And that's something Zonder does in these images too. Like, so if his bricklayer looks just as a bricklayer should, kind of like he's built of bricks himself, right? He's got that same solidity, that same strength. What kind of portrayal of a notary does Zonder give us here? First of all, we should maybe define what a notary is or what a notary does. Anyone have any idea about that?
A notary?
The work of a notary is?
I have no idea.
So if you ever like sell a car, or if you, I don't know, I don't think they do this in the case of marriages, but if you ever are involved in some sort of official transaction involving documents, like whether it's government documents or something that's somehow, tracked by the government, you may be asked to get your signatures notarized. That means you have to bring it to somebody, a notary, who will stamp it with a seal attesting that that notary witnessed you sign the document in their presence. It's an additional layer of kind of security to prevent against forgeries of signatures and things of that kind. So a notary is an official who works with documents and has to be very strict about making sure all the rules are followed, all the kind of legal requirements are observed. And the question, I guess, is in representing this particular individual as a notary and identify him only by his profession, what is it about the appearance of this person that maybe conveys that sense of what they do for a living?
He's got a cane. He has a hat. Well, he just looks official. He's got everything.
Yeah, like what kind of, characteristic or what kind of adjectives would you use to describe this person just to judge him on the basis of the photograph?
He looks business, like he's serious.
It's very serious, yeah.
You can tell by his face. And he's got I guess that's I don't know dogs. I think that's a Doberman.
Yeah, I think
horse
so.
dogs.
Or it's yeah.
And I guess his stature, because he's not looking at the camera.
But he's posed, standing very straight and stiff, right? And yeah, he's not looking at the camera, so it has a kind of formal quality to it. His coat is all buttoned up, so everything about him sort of proclaims his suitability for this profession. Things are maybe a little more complicated in the case of some of these images, but like pastry cook. Why, of all the pastry cooks in the world, did August Zonder single out this one, or all the pastry cooks in Germany, let's say, to stand in as a representative of that trade or that profession?
Was it possibly because of his body type? Because I know in a lot of like cartoons and stuff, like especially like the old Disney cartoons, a lot of like cooks always had like rounded bodies, and they, like I guess it was like a symbol of like, in order for you to be a cook, you have to be well fed,
right?
Something like
that.
Yeah, so
and especially a pastry cook, right, whose job it is to prepare desserts. It kind of goes together with our mental image of the kind of classic or archetypal pastry cook. Maybe also the way his the shape of his head echoes this bald kind of shining head echoes the shape of the bowl that he's mixing the pastry in. These kinds of visual symmetries or harmonies are important to maybe kind of defining the subjects of Saunders' photographs in terms of what they do, what they're occupied in doing, what they, how they employ their hands and so forth. So to go back to this comparison, if Saunders' bricklayer is very much, conforms to our mental image of the ideal bricklayer, the typical bricklayer, then the Becher's coal bunker, in a similar way, fits a certain building type. It could be, if it were exhibited alongside other photographs of theirs of coal bunkers, we would recognize it as belonging to that building type, that architectural type. And yet it's also humanized in a way because it's unique. And that's what interested the Beschers about these early industrial structures constructed, end of the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century, is that they weren't the products of, prefab construction. They were all, they all look similar if they're built for the same function, but their forms vary slightly depending on the specific requirements of the site or the materials available, the engineers in charge of constructing them, and so forth. Now, what about this one? This is maybe a little trickier. What kind of connections could we draw between these two photographs, if any? Tina, what do you think?
Every time I look at the house, I just think, yep, that looks just like him, kind of. It's just one of those things, man, that I don't know, because for some reason, whenever I see like the second storage where it like comes out,
Yeah,
and I look back at him, it just looks like it. I could just see him that he is his house because like, it just looks like his chin.
yeah,
I guess the structure of the house is kind of almost relatable to the structure of the man, even though it's probably not true. But I guess the way the photographs are taken, that they're off to like it's more focused on the right side. It's right side heavy than it is on the left side. But one takes up the entire photo and the other one it doesn't, because you also have like the left side that's like pretty empty. So
yeah, well, you're right. I couldn't resist the temptation to put these together, in part just because of the visual similarities between, the pose of the unemployed man's head, the jutting chin, and the way, like you said, the building in the Becher photograph, the second story kind of protrudes forward. But can we go further than that and think like, okay, Sonder photographs mainly employed people, right? These are people who are defined in terms of their professions: the bricklayer, pastry cook, painter, maybe not the country girls, but the notary. But the unemployed man, in relation to those other subjects, he doesn't have a profession, or he's kind of outside of all professions. So if one of Saunders' goals was to create this album of images that would reflect the range of professional types in German society, then the unemployed and the urban poor, they don't really fit neatly into that structure.
Well, I think both pictures kind of have like this abandoned like type of connotation about them.
Mhm,
Although one refers to a human being and one is a home, the
mhm,
house looks abandoned,
mhm.
and homeless people are pretty much abandoned. The government treats them like crap. Everyone blames all of their problems on them.
Mhm.
They just are carrying a lot of abandonment and loneliness. And I think both of these pictures both have that same like lonely feeling to them because they're just kind of forgotten. Like they don't
Yeah,
forgotten and they just don't exist to the normal outside society.
yeah. So you could be right about the building on the right, that I mean, there's no obvious signs that it's occupied. But
Yeah.
what about if we were to look at it just even as architecture? And that's presumably how the Beschers looked at it, right? Because they're primarily interested in these structures
Mhm.
as, you know, as architecture, or for their you know their sculptural or physical qualities. Um, what else could we say about the architecture of this house in relation to its surroundings?
Mm.
Do you imagine that there are many other houses in the neighborhood that look like this one?
I don't think so. It kind of stands out.
It stands out, right?
The other ones seem a little bit shorter. It's a lot taller. From what I can
Hmm.
see in the horizon line, the buildings fall below about like the second
Yeah.
story, what you said.
And the
Um,
way it juts out, I mean, this is something you see actually more. You don't see that in this country really, because a lot of these types of houses are very, very old. They go back to medieval times, and that's partly why they look so irregular. But in modern Germany, they do stand out because they are oddly shaped or oddly positioned. Nobody's mentioned this so far, but if you look at the way the building fronts on the street, it's kind of at an angle, right? It has situated at this oblique angle, whereas most buildings, their fronts, line up very nicely with the sidewalk that runs alongside them, like that Chinese restaurant in the background there. And that's also a disparity between the modern day um, Chinese takeout place and this medieval kind of heap, um, this kind of ramshackle dwelling that looks like it has been passed over by time, and the rest of the city has kind of modernized around it. So in both cases, we're talking about a, an object or a photographic subject that doesn't fit into um, that doesn't really fit the context, or um, that stands out in some way, that uh, doesn't kind of accommodate itself to this larger pattern. Um, and as I've said repeatedly, this is one reason why the Beschers were drawn to these types of buildings, because um, even the ones that conform to a type often show a lot of variation between different individual examples. So these industrial facades that were photographed between 1975 and 1985, um, they probably fronted on warehouses or maybe factories, um, and served a similar function, but visually they are all quite distinct. Uh, and so even in photographing these, um, structures that don't include any traces of human presence, these are structures that are no longer in use. They're essentially abandoned in the majority of cases. And the Beschers are very careful to photograph them without any people present on the site, so that all of our attention is focused on the architecture. The buildings themselves start to take on a kind of human quality. They start to appear as individuals, as if they have personality of their own. So there's this tension in the Bescher's work between this idea of a typology, and that's a really important term in discussing their work. It's a term that they themselves use to describe their project when they go out and they look for different examples of water towers, for example, that were constructed around the turn of the 20th century. And then they put together all those images after the fact. You know, these photographs might have been taken in all different parts of the country, maybe even in other countries, you know, surrounding. We are not told what their original locations were. We are not given any information about them except their function. The same way that the people in Saunders' photographs aren't really identified for us in any way except by their profession. And yet we are interested in these small differences as well as the things that don't quite fit the pattern. So a typology is kind of a loose organizing structure, a loose category or classification that fits in everything that belongs to a certain type, whether it's a professional type or an architectural type, or you know, a type of engineering or what have you. But that doesn't demand that all the individuals within that type be identical. All right. So now we're going to jump ahead a little bit, although it's not really, we're not really jumping ahead chronologically, but going from photography to conceptual art. You know, there's an artist, American artist named Douglas Hubler, who was not a photographer, although his work makes extensive use of photographs, just as I was describing the case of other conceptual artists of this same period, people like Martha Rosler, or you know, Ed Ruscha's Every Building on the Sunset Strip was kind of one of the earliest examples of this, a conceptual project that makes use of photographic imagery not as a source of, you know, visual interest or artistic skill, but as a source of information. And in this piece, Hubler asked Bernd Bescher, so one member of this pair, who was engaged in producing all these images we've been discussing, to pose as various different kinds of people while Hubler took his photograph. So he made a set of 10 images based on these instructions. He asked Bescher to quote unquote look like a priest, a criminal, a lawyer, an old man, a policeman, an artist, a philosopher, a spy, a nice guy, and Bernd Bescher, that is, you know, as himself. And then he, several weeks later, he returned the photographs, the prints, to Bernd Bescher and asked him to identify which image matched up with which of these identities or roles, without telling him what the original sequence was. So the assumption was that that Bescher might not be able to remember, you know, with perfect accuracy, which pose was the criminal, which pose was the artist, which pose was the philosopher or the spy, or so forth. And the interesting thing then about the resulting work, the work as Hubler conceived of it, consists simply of the photographs and this typewritten statement, which basically just conveys the information I gave you just now about how the images were made and how they were, you know, how the artist asked Hubler to resequence them or to label and classify them some weeks after they were originally taken. The piece is called Variable variable piece 101. So there's various ways of interpreting that title, but one interesting thing about the work is that it's each on different occasions it's been exhibited more or less in this form, but not always with the same sequence. So first of all, we don't know if Bernd Becher correctly remembered which of these images represented the nice guy, which one the old man, the philosopher, the lover, and so forth. Second of all, it's not clear to us why the sequence matters, but when this work was exhibited in France in 1992 to 93, the images were shown in this sequence according to the order that Bernd Becher put them in. So number one is supposed he thinks represented Bernd Becher. Number two, the nice guy. Number three, spy. Four, an old man, and so forth. But when the work was exhibited a couple of years later in Los Angeles, the photographs were shown in a completely different order. And more than that, some of the images are not exactly identical. Like the number three in the sequence when the work was exhibited in France is not exactly the same as number three in as it appeared at the show in Los Angeles. And then more recently, the work went up for auction at Christie's in 2016, and they changed the sequence again for whatever reason. Maybe just for because of for aesthetic reasons. Maybe they chose the sequence that they thought was most interesting. So if we're trying to understand what Hubler is doing here, and what connection it can have with the Becher's own work, what kind of statement is he making about the Becher's artistic project in playing around with the sequence in this way, playing with the fallibility of memory and so forth? I guess I will just leave that as an open question and barrel on ahead here with this comparison, which gets us to where we really need to be here. The work that appears below is a work by the artist Lorna Simpson, who is the focus of the second of our two readings for this week. So both of these are works, just to start us off, both of these are works that make use of photography, but they're not straight photographs, and they're not it's not necessarily these aren't photographs that we are meant to appreciate on their artistic merits or purely for their visual interest. In both cases, the photographic information is put into some kind of relationship with another order of information or communication, linguistic or maybe narrative, textual. Both works rely upon text to supply some kind of caption or explanation, or to in some way invite an attempt at correlation with the content of the images. So these are the things, these are some of the things they have in common. This is why I'm putting these two works together for us to compare. But obviously what maybe is most important here are some of the differences. So what can we say without knowing necessarily much about Lorna Simpson's work, but also maybe taking that into consideration as an important difference between the works? What can we say about the differences between these two pieces, the one by Douglas Hubler above and the one by Lorna Simpson below?
I think Huber is trying to use his face to make a point, but what's her last name? Lorna
Simpson?
Simpson is doing like the exact opposite. Like I think they're similar in like the way they're laid out and the structure of how the pieces look. However, I think they have different end results because, well, Lorna's at the bottom, she's got like A, E, I, O, U, which is a CNC, if anyone has taken an English class. Amnesia, error.
Or been to elementary school.
Right. In an English class, elementary school, too. But I think that Huber's looks more like whimsical and comedic, while Simpson's is kind of mysterious, and I don't quite understand. I don't know what it means. So
yeah, well, that's important, right? That there is even if we don't know what's going on in the Simpson, in the Lorna Simpson piece, or don't know exactly how to interpret these figures, in part because we don't see the faces, there is, just for that reason, a significant difference in tone, but also, you know, the exaggerated expressions on Bernd Becher's face in Hubler's photographs gives the piece sort of a comedic or comical or humorous, a kind of lighthearted, or as you said, whimsical feeling, which we don't get at all, I think, from the other piece.
No.
Or the Simpson piece. Well, what about the fact that Hubler gives us faces, right? He gives us all these different exaggerated faces. And Simpson doesn't give us any faces. So does that make Hubler's work recognizable as something like portraiture, and Simpson's work clearly different from that? It's clearly not portraiture. Could we say that the work that the work by Hubler gives us a portrait or multiple portraits of Bernd Becher?
Yes.
We could.
Possibly.
That's safe to say. It could.
Safe
It
to
might.
say.
Maybe.
Maybe, just maybe.
Maybe yes. Maybe no. Well, does anyone want to play devil's advocate and say no? This is, you know, this is.
Go against.
Or in what way is this not a traditional portrait, or not like simply a series of portraits?
Because of its, again, like back to the like comedic effects of it. Like portraiture is normally, I mean, when you look at portraiture from like the 1600s through, or like the 1700s to like the 1800s, like the late 1800s, they're very like posed and proper, and they're dressed nice, and they're all looking their best, and these, he looks silly, like he's making faces at the camera, and people wouldn't do that because they wouldn't waste photography. It was very hard to like make a picture.
But maybe Bernd Becher is just a really silly guy, right? So maybe this is
devil's
just
advocate, Seth. Maybe he is, but this is not like classical.
Okay, so what else makes it not a traditional portrait? Or
he don't got the 3/4 turn, dog.
3/4 turn.
No, that's not what I'm looking for.
Oh, well, I mean, that's one of them.
by traditional portrait, I just mean like, okay, so let's forget about traditional. Let's talk about like you go to Sears or Walmart for your family Christmas card photo or whatever it is, and you end up with an image that's probably not much, more beautiful than these. Like it's, it could just as well be a passport photo, let's say. And these kind of look like passport photos. I mean, that's how they are cropped, right? And passport photos could be considered a portrait. They're a form of identification. But what is it in Hubler's piece that goes against the grain of that whole idea of photographs offering a means of identifying the person photographed?
They don't have like a very serious face, because usually when you take like, I guess, photos for government issue licenses, they suggest that you don't smile, because I guess their assumption is that people look different when they make like different, I guess, facial expressions too.
Right.
And they don't want to.
And why is he making all these different facial expressions?
I guess he's trying to go against that. I guess trying to change who he is.
Well, what were the instructions that he was given that he's carrying out here?
Well, he had like characters.
Exactly, right? So he is playing all these different roles here. And that is completely incompatible with the idea of a portrait. A portrait is supposed to show who you really are. But in presenting all these different images together of Besher, but being, the policeman, the priest, the philosopher, the spy, Hubler is frustrating any hope on or any assumption on our part that we're going to be able to learn something about Bernd Bescher from looking at these images. Bernd Bescher, in 9 out of the 10, is being somebody other than Bernd Bescher. And then just to like twist the knife a little bit, Hubler asks him also to pose as Bernd Bescher. The problem is we can't be sure which one of these shows him posing as himself even. Like there is no way for us as viewers to know which of these images, I won't even say is the real Bernd Bescher, but shows Bernd Bescher pretending to be the real Bernd Bescher.
The one first, second row.
Wait, the first one in the second row?
Yeah, I can make that face too.
You think that's the real Bernd Bescher? Or was that not what you were saying? What about the first one?
No, you said who the real one is. So
yeah.
It's like the first two of like each row.
Well, it can't be the first two because only 1 out of the 10 is him being Bernd Bescher.
Oh, I'm going to the second row, second photo, because it's more
serious.
A little bit. Like you could tell his eyes are like kind of scrunched, almost like he's mad, but it kind of looks like that's him. But you can also go to like the second row, the very last photo. It just looks like a more genuine reaction.
Yeah.
Than the rest of them.
Right. So, I mean, there are some options that seem more likely than others, right? But the point is ultimately we don't know for sure. And so there is that relation, that similarity between these two works. Both of them are frustrating the expectations that we bring to a photograph, specifically a photograph of somebody's face, a portrait photograph, and confounding us by, substituting for the typical portrait, some other form of identification, either with a profession like policeman, priest, or character type, lover, wise guy. Nice guy. I misread that. Old man. Or in the case of Lawrence Simpson's work, by just giving us this abstract vowel, right? So let's look more closely at her work now. What is the relationship between the imagery and the text, the vowels that are presented in place of the subject's face and the texts below, these one-word captions that appear below the images? Do those help us at all? Or in what way might we start to attempt to connect the information contained in those texts to the imagery of the photographs? Arturo?
Yeah, get him up in there. Also, those are
Making
vowels. I
rounds.
just realized what they were.
Yes,
That's
they are vowels. And there's even an order to them, right? That's how I was taught my vowels. A, E, I, O, U.
it's interesting though that each vowel is associated with like this very serious, like these very serious words, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What is it about the words that make them sound serious?
well, you have amnesia, and I think it's like lack of sleep. I don't remember.
Amnesia is like when somebody loses their memory.
Oh,
You know, could be as a result of a injury or some kind of trauma.
and you have like error, and every time you see something with error in it, it's not. They have very negative.
It's not good.
They have all of them have a negative connotation. So like
Yes.
indifference more like a neutral thing. Like you can be indifferent about something. I don't know what omission is. Uncivil, that one automatically has something negative tied to
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
So, and I think the way she has photographed herself is a very, except for indifference, looks kind of different. They're very, it's a very serious posture that she has put on there with these very serious or negatively connotated words tied to
Mhm.
it by using vowels.
Mm-hmm. Other
Yeah, Arturo,
thoughts?
now's your turn.
Arturo,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, sorry, my video was being all weird. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, especially like it had a lot of like negative words, like especially in terms of error, uncivil, a lot of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also, I took it as a little bit more of a serious as well, due to the fact that it was covering her face in like an egg form. So as
Mhm.
if like her personality, or not her personality, but rather her identity is covered up with these bold letters, capitalized letters, which then lead to a negative connotative word, especially like
Yes.
sort of words like error, omission, uncivil, um, and then indifference, amnesia, uh, the like things that relate towards that. So it was definitely like I felt like that a lot of our identity went into, or a lot of our identity is clouded or covered by these negative words due to the
Yeah.
covering.
So it's like her identity is
Yes.
erased here and is
Yes.
replaced by these negative
Or
terms.
yes, or which can be taken negatively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, uncivil is definitely negative. Indifference probably is a negative, but the
Yeah.
rest all
Indifference
have
could be
like,
negative. I mean, if we
yeah.
expect from people that they show us some interest or empathy or whatever, indifference then would be negative, right? Because they are indifferent to us. They are treating us, or you know, whoever is indifferent to somebody else is not showing any kind of human interest in that person.
Yes.
Good. Okay. The only other thing I would mention is, like Laja pointed out, AEIOU is one of the first things we learn in school, right? When we're learning, you know, how to spell, what a vowel is, what a consonant is. So it has these connotations with something very fundamental and basic and kind of elementary and almost self-evident. Whereas the words, these are a little more esoteric, right? These are like $100 vocabulary words. Some of them, maybe not all of them. Error, is a pretty common word, but amnesia, uncivil omission, these are not words that we learn in kindergarten or elementary school. So that's something else to think about. I mean, I don't have an explanation necessarily for that that element of the work, but it's something we might think about. All right, so the title of this piece is Easy for Who to Say, 1989, if that enlightens us in any way as to the artist's intentions or motivations here. Something that we haven't commented on so far is what she's wearing. These images, it's getting ahead of myself. Maybe we'll come back to that. Yeah, we'll come back to that later. All right, I have a couple of other comparisons. So we were just talking about Cindy Sherman recently. And so, let me fix this. So what if we were to compare one of her untitled film stills here on the left with this piece by Lorna Simpson? Can we identify anything they have in common? Or to maybe give us some more to kind of make the question a little more concrete. How is the artist playing with conventions of photography or portraiture, the photographic representation of people in these works?
I don't think they're very similar, but I don't know. That just might be my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're quite different. I don't know.
If you had to sum up, like in a sentence, what the Cindy Sherman to the left is about, and there's no wrong answer here. I don't mean to quiz you, but just like, what do you think is kind of the focus here, the emphasis
on the Cindy Sherman?
The Cindy Sherman, yeah.
I think it's her obsession with like voyeurism. I think of like watching, like looking. But the piece on the right does not give you the opportunity to voyeur. Like there's
right.
nothing like it's like a certain, I guess, like from the picture, it's like about an inch like camera, like a passport photo, like we were talking earlier. Yeah. And there's no faces, so you can't really see who it is. All you can see are her presumably her shoulders, and just these like words, and that doesn't, I don't know. There's no words included in the Cindy Sherman piece, and adding language often creates a barrier between certain art pieces. Yeah,
that's a really good important point. There is no text in the Cindy Sherman's work. There's no other source of information competing with the image. As you said, there's a voyeuristic quality in Sherman's work that we don't get from the Simpson piece. The image, the Sherman image, is more sexualized, kind of in keeping with that.
Yeah, well, hers, the one on the right, is not really sexualized.
It's not, right. Yeah, like a passport photo, it feels indifferent, right? It feels very kind of objective and clinical is another way maybe of putting it, right?
Right.
Well, actually, going back to the other image, the only similarity that I would be able to have, and it's kind of a stretch, is that in both situations, the person viewing it is going to establish judgments. With the
Mhm.
letter one, the judgment's more focused, like you're trying to push an idea via the text.
Mhm.
So when you have that idea of amnesia with the woman, then the immediate image in your head is like, oh, this person's forgetful. And you don't even see their face, which dehumanizes them in a way.
Yeah.
With the other one, it is sexual, so obviously your immediate thought is going to be that, regardless of whether or not that was the intent. That's immediately what you're going to think. So you're
Yeah.
pushing that judgment on that as well.
Right. So you could say, like, maybe, I'm not sure if this is where you were going, but if I can kind of rephrase it a little, there's a process of kind of stereotyping going on, or
Yes.
yeah, like we are bringing judgments or bringing assumptions or presuppositions to these
Exactly.
images that prevent us from seeing these people as people.
Exactly.
Cool. And so then maybe we want to account for the differences. So there are many ways in which people can be stereotyped, right? There are many ways in which um, people's individuality can be kind of subsumed under some pre-existing conception. It could be through this kind of voyeuristic gaze that sexualizes the female body and treats and represents women, as bodies or as objects of sexual interest rather than as individuals. But there's also this kind of detached, clinical, official, kind of governmental gaze that treats people in a way that dehumanizes them. And maybe the differences there also have something to do with the differences between the subjects. So Cindy Sherman is photographing herself, this youngish white woman, and Lorna Simpson here is photographing an African American woman of kind of indeterminate age. And in our society, in American society in particular, the racial identity of this racial categories are kind of omnipresent in the media in the way people of different skin color are represented in, say, movies or in news reports and so forth. So whether or not Lorna Simpson is making a statement about race, it seems like it's almost kind of impossible in in our society to overlook the fact that the woman in these photographs is specifically identified as African American, not only by her skin color but also maybe by hair, hairstyle, and that in spite of the fact that we know nothing else about her. So she is that is kind of her only identifying characteristic that is presented to us here. This is another comparison I came up with. I'm just going to skip over it. I think it might be interesting in another way, but I don't want to. I know that we're kind of running over time here. So what about Martha Rosler's work? Could we establish any points of comparison with this piece, The Bowery in Two Inadequate Descriptive Systems is the full title of the Rosler piece. Remember, it deals with, you can see it as a kind of critical take on the way in which homeless people or alcoholics or the urban poor have historically been represented in documentary photography. Whoops. So if Roller's work is dealing with stereotypes in one way, what kind of stereotypes might Simpson be addressing in this work? Is it something connected to the racial identity of the subject? Or is it not possible to draw any connection between these words, these sort of negative sounding terms that are included as captions in the Simpson work, and the identification of the subject as African American?
I'm having a hard time reading the top piece.
Right. So the text.
I'm trying to like read the words and like relate them to each other, but I can't.
Right. Yeah, the text is, these are just all synonyms for drunk or intoxicated. So except for this last one here, this is just the title of the piece. But
Okay.
Up to the gills, under the table, slopped over, limp, melted, drunk, drunken, booze hound, juice hound.
A lot of people, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out, my words aren't working. I'm sorry. I'm
It's
trying
okay.
to, I don't want to say something incorrect.
Right. Yeah, well, it's okay. So it's tricky to talk about, but if we, and I think it's the difficult thing about Simpson's work is that maybe it's not obvious what kind of statement the work might be making about race, if it is making a statement about race. In very general terms, we can say there has to be some kind of connection between the facelessness of these images, the erasure of the subject's identity, and this idea of a stereotype, which could include racial stereotypes, erasing people's individuality, so that we see them in terms that are, we are inclined to kind of prejudge them based upon our stereotypical ideas, or maybe stereotypes in the media. Let's move on. Maybe looking at a wider range of her works would be helpful here. So this is titled Guarded Conditions, 1989, and it also includes text. But the text just consists of the alternation of the phrase sex attacks and skin attacks. So does that help at all in identifying this real or fictional subject of these photographs, or does it help to place this person or these persons in into some kind of narrative, some kind of story that we might be able to put together based upon these phrases: guarded conditions, skin attacks, sex attacks? What are our more general associations with these kinds of phrases?
Spousal abuse. Oh crap. A victim of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
These are more things geared towards women, like what they went through.
Right. So
I don't know. I think it's kind of it's not common or very like unheard of a lot to hear a case of a woman assaulting a man.
Right. So does that automatically put the woman or women in these photographs kind of in the role of potential victim, maybe?
I think so. I mean, I feel like I guess it kind of sounds like she is a victim of
Mhm.
all this. And I think it's more of a way of the way her back is turned. So because a lot of them, there's no face shown because I think she wants her viewers or her audience to kind of like feel like that's them or that's someone else that they know who've been through something like that.
Okay.
In the gesture of her hand say something which I really can't really describe to, but I don't know.
Hmm.
But that's, I feel like there's like more to it that I like can't think of.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. Well, again, I think that's part of the difficulty of these works is that they lead us up to a certain point and no farther, right? So maybe they put us in mind of, say, media reports of sexual assault or whatever. But it's hard to get any further than that. Like, is the subject of this kind of verbal narrative or suggest, or if we can even call it that, this kind of skeleton narrative, is it keyed to the racial identity of the subject, or is that incidental? What is the relation then between these two phrases, sex attacks and skin attacks?
I think, I don't know. I feel like the way the hand gestures are, it's kind of like a guarded position in a way.
Yeah.
Because if we're gonna like, this one's kind of hard for me to like say because whenever women like go through this, sometimes they get turned into slaves and they're very heavily guarded too, which I can kind of see like the hand gestures from behind. And they're basically like it's vulnerable like property. Because it's showing them they're like a victim of attack, like both as a race too, even to this day. We still face racism. So like as a race, as a gender,
Yeah.
and um just who they are, because it seems like women were not strong too. And I think because it also she's doing a lot with like race, what I feel like when you're boiling it down to like that.
Yeah. Right. Again, that's the only identifying information we're given about these figures is like they're female, African American, maybe the dress or the shift that she's wearing leads our interpretation in certain directions, but it's also simply the most maybe kind of generic article of clothing that could be produced. It's very difficult to it doesn't help us that much in placing the figure in a specific context. Okay, there's just another image. The text is a little bit clear, but the color is a little bit off. And then the gridded presentation or display of the photographs is important too, maybe in the way that it becomes a kind of screen or filter. It changes the way we look at the figure. It literally kind of cuts up the figure and arranges it in terms of this kind of repetition of rows and columns. Different.
I think she's trying to give that illusion of you're looking through a window pane.
Well, I could see that, except you also have the repetition of the figure, right? Which makes me think more of, graphs and tables and charts, and those sorts of conventions for presenting information. And it also connects, of course, to the use of these types of grids and this serial repetition in minimalism and conceptual art. Another work that includes these little bits of language or story also seem to be referring to a story. There's a kind of meta language here. Her story. Each time they looked for proof, prints, signs of entry, marks. So here again, the terms that are kind of suggestive of some type of violence or crime, marks on a body, signs of entry, forced entry, prints, fingerprints, proof, all these things put the images into a very specific register, like this kind of legal or juridical register. It's only implied, but there are these disturbing suggestions of victimization, maybe, and of violence. And the reference to, the use of this type of language, again, this is the kind of language, these are the kind of words or phrases that we associate maybe with newspaper reports of crimes. So it further relates the imagery to media representations of crime, media representations maybe of the victims of crime or witnesses in criminal testimony proceedings. And if I were looking for ways to relate this to our discussion of Sherman's work and the reading by Laura Mulvey on Sherman, it would probably relate to the way in which women who are the victims of violence are such a kind of common or stock element in the types of fictional narratives that we find in films and dramas. And if, we relate these works from Sherman's later career to her earlier untitled film stills, then it might be possible to make that argument that she is also thinking along these lines in portraying herself in this way, as this kind of corpse-like figure here on the ground, suggestive of some kind of attack. All right. So the reading on Simpson's work, it focuses a lot on her critical reception, the way art critics have made sense of her work or characterized her work. Certainly from the very beginning, it was assumed by many critics that her work was in some way about race. Lorna Simpson is herself African-American, and her works consistently feature, her early works consistently feature images of African-American women, even though we are never or very rarely given anything like a portrait or portraiture. The identifying features, the faces, are typically cut off or cropped out or not shown. Instead, like a lot of these other conceptual artists like Martha Rosler or photo conceptual artists, Lorna Simpson is calling into question the relationship between these images and the narratives, especially textual narratives that we bring to bear or that kind of intrude themselves upon our interpretation of images of Black women. So whether it's negative media stereotypes or whether it's certain types of stereotypical narratives that get reproduced, representations of race and gender in the media, we are given just enough kind of a hint to feel like we should be constructing some kind of story about the images, but we're never given enough information or enough details to actually do so. So this work titled Figure, it shows what is obviously the figure of a woman here in this photograph, but also all of these phrases that include the word figure and its different meanings. So figured the worst, figured on all the times there was no camera, he was disfigured, figured there would be no reaction, figured legality has nothing to do with it, so forth and so on. So this play between image and text, between different meanings of a word or the different meanings of a particular photographic representation, the connections are never tight enough to be able to attribute a definitive statement on the artist's part, unlike Rosler, who's very clearly making a kind of ironic or critical comment about the stereotypical ways in which the poor people are portrayed, the urban poor are portrayed in popular culture at large. And so the author of this essay, which is titled Bye Bye Black Girl, is looking at the ways in which critics attempt to kind of shoehorn Simpson's work into a preconceived idea of what, what it's all about. The assumption that she is making a comment about race or racism, and that becomes increasingly difficult, that assumption becomes increasingly difficult to maintain or as you look across the range of the work she produced over her career, including more recently. Many of these works from like 89, 90, 91, essentially made her reputation. But in subsequent years, she went on to produce quite a few works that don't feature images of African-American women or people at all. And critics, for the most part, were completely confounded by this. They didn't understand whether this was a retreat from the more overtly politicized subject matter, the more racialized subject matter of the earlier works, or if she was attempting to address the same sets of issues, but simply using different kinds of imagery, or more fundamentally, I think the issue for the author of this essay is that many critics were disappointed by the later works, or consider or criticize them for their lack of subject matter. And one of the questions posed by Huey Copeland, the author, is whether the artist herself is being judged for not kind of complying with the expectations of white critics, that a Black artist or a Black woman artist should make work about Black identity or Black female identity, and whether this is fair, whether this is, as it obviously is not, whether this is really just kind of a double standard that isn't applied to other artists who are free to make works of art that aren't obviously or necessarily political, or don't, directly engage with in kind of social commentary. So she produced like this series of images showing scenes of Central Park in New York City, and there are felt text panels that refer to sexual encounters in the park, but nothing that explicitly speaks of race here. Black and white photographs printed on felt, which creates a strange kind of fuzziness in the image. This looking like, an image of a bathroom in a hotel, maybe. And again, there are text panels that connect these images to sexual encounters, but not in a way that necessarily clarifies what the story is or what the narrative is. And Copeland draws a comparison between Lorna Simpson's career and the artist Kiki Smith, who is a white woman artist whose work is very explicitly about deals with feminist content and subject matter, but who is never judged from the standpoint of race. Like, she includes female figures in many of her works who are sort of racially indeterminate, but nobody ever asks the same questions of her work as they do about Lorna Simpson. So that's the explanation for the title of the reading, Bye Bye Black Girl. It's kind of treating this as an open question, how to understand the disappearance of the figure of the Black female or the Black woman character in Simpson's later work, and whether that says, what we can learn from this about not only Simpson's own intentions for her work, but also the ways in which she is treated differently from other artists, or different expectations are brought to her work specifically because she is a Black woman. All right. So thanks everybody for sticking it out. As usual, we went longer than I intended to, but I think it was a good discussion. And hopefully will be helpful to you with the reading, since the author doesn't really provide a lot of context for the work. But this will give you a sense of the background and make it a little bit easier to understand where he's coming from, I think. All right, any last questions? As I said, the quizzes have all been posted, so you have until this Sunday to submit them, unless you're a presenter, in which case you don't have to complete your own quiz. I did make some changes to the quizzes that were submitted. For those of you who still have to present, if any of you are listening to this recording, again, I would refer you to the sample online presentation quiz that I put on Blackboard. Not all of the quiz questions have to be keyed to the slides, but in general, I would prefer the more that are directly connected to PowerPoint slides in that way, the better. All right. Well, I don't know where Laja went, but I can't really blame her for leaving since we were supposed to be finished at 1:45.
Well, see
Thanks,
you on.
everybody, for your
Okay.
comments.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.